Previously on Retro Game On, we repaired this Atari Lynx 2. While there are a few things that we did, the primary repair was a rebuild of the power circuit. If you would like to see that, I'm sure there is a card on screen now, but the one thing we couldn't fix in that video was the screen. There's a large black shadow on one side, and the screen tech from 1989 could probably have been replaced anyway. So I ordered this. Yes, spicy candy. No, besides from that, I ordered a McWill mod. So in this video, I'll show you how I installed the LCD, as well as the VGA video out, which I'll hopefully use to capture video for my game reviews. Apart from candy, in the box we receive a VGA socket as well as mounting hardware, 2 lengths of pre-cut ribbon cable, and of course the main attraction itself, the McWill LCD screen. Before we start, I just want to show you this cool piece of kit I recently added to my workbench. This little doodaddy will demagnetize or magnetize your screwdrivers. It used to be I had to separate my screwdrivers by those which were magnetic and those that weren't, but now I can have any screwdriver I like being magnetic. Oh, the power. Using my newfound tool, we can get down to disassembly. If you haven't watched the original video, it is quite simple. To start with, there are 4 screws around the perimeter of the Lynx, although these will be under some adhesive pads, which have already been removed here. Lastly, there is a smaller screw in the battery compartment, and make sure you remember which one goes in there, because if you put too long of a screw in, it could possibly pierce the ribbon cables which lay underneath. So that's definitely something to take note of. With that and the battery compartment removed, you can then unclip those 2 ribbon cables. These are both held in by clips, so make sure you push down on the clips to release the ribbon cables, and then the top circuit board can be removed. As you can roughly see here, the McWill LCD is a complete replacement for the screen in the Lynx. In due time, that whole assembly will be removed and discarded. The first step is to remove a handful of components. As far as I'm aware, these are used for the current backlight. This includes a coil, 2 transistors, 2 capacitors, a power module, and also a potentiometer, which is the contrast wheel, if you wish to install the VGA mod. And whoa, just in as I was recording, we have some more kit for the workbench. Today, we have some blurry anti-static brushes. Cool. I bet you'll see those in a future video. So I'll be using my electric desoldering pump to remove these parts, since they're all through-hole components. Before I do that, however, I usually reflow the points with fresh solder, as this makes it easier to suck up. And with that done, all the components come out super cleanly and easily. All in all, to remove these components, I think it took me less than 5 minutes. If I was just using braid or, God forbid, just a handheld pump, this would probably take me closer to half an hour. That pump is the best $40 I've ever spent. And after removing components in this fashion, it is good practice to give the board a good clean with IPA, because a clean Lynx is a happy Lynx. I should mention that at this point in the instructions, it does recommend that you do a 5-volt check, just to make sure that the LCD screen won't get fried when you first turn it on. I'll admit I was a bit lazy and didn't do this myself because I did just rebuild the power circuit, but if you haven't done that, I do recommend that you do this check, and I've linked the official instructions in the description box if you wish to read them yourself. With those components removed, we can now remove the screen as well. This is simply held in by a handful of Phillip head screws, but don't lose those as we will need them to mount the new screen. It's certainly interesting to compare the two. While the LCD is a magnitude smaller than the old tube-based fluorescent screen, 30 odd years of technological advancement is pretty swell as well. As you can see, it just sits there exactly like the old screen does, with the existing mainboard resting on top. Alright, let's get into the meat of things. To begin installation of the LCD screen, I first started by priming all the solder points. Well, maybe priming isn't the right word, but you just have the bare contacts, so solder does need to be added. This is aided by flux, and if you don't have any flux on your workbench, I highly recommend it. It makes a lot of tasks a lot easier. Now there's of course no reason why you can't use your own wire if you wish to, but it was a bit tricky to figure out the lengths for this, so I found it easier to just use what the seller provided. I figured the lengths would be close enough. And keep in mind here that you do want a bit of slack in the cabling here, just because of how the Lynx is all put together. If it's really tight, you're gonna really struggle reassembling this. Overall, the wiring is straightforward. There are 2 wires for power and ground, a third wire which controls the backlight button, which is now used to scroll through different video modes, as well as 9 data lines, which soldered to where the original ribbon cable for the screen would plug in. It would have been cool if they used a ribbon cable as well, just like before. That would make installation super easy, but maybe they can't source that size and type anymore. The contacts for these data line are also sort of on the wrong side of the module. This means that the wiring sort of has to come up above and across, and then back up again to get onto the main board. I don't know if there's something obvious I'm missing here, but obviously I can't route them the other way because then they'll be in the way of the screen. But while there is a bit of travel distance for the wire, the length provided actually works out quite well. Alright, let's cast our mind to the VGA mod for a second. For now, I'm deciding not to use the provided socket, and I'm just going to wire a cable directly in. This might make it a bit awkward, but this way I don't have to destroy the case as much as I would if I were to install that socket. So with my strategy, I only have to drill the one round hole, and this is basically the diameter of the spare VGA cable I had. That's about 5.5mm for those playing at home. I also drilled in a spot where the two halves of the case meet, so this way I can easily route the cable. And as I went, I gradually increased the size of the drill bit until the cable fit in nice and snugly. I chose that side of the case as well, since it's closest to where the VGA out connections are. This comprises of 6 connections. That's RGB, vertical and horizontal sync, as well as ground. I don't think I've actually cut up a VGA cable before. For starters, my wire stripper wasn't big enough, so I had to use this knife. And it's a real mess on the inside, there's shielding everywhere. So we'll come back to this. Back to the wiring, I prepped all these solder pads on the main board. Just in case you want to get your bearings, the original ribbon cable we pulled out during disassembly are under these pads. It took a little bit of prepping to make sure that I soldered everything to the right place. Notice my notepad there on the left. But even though I did have to end up folding the ribbon cable over, I think everything went pretty well. I didn't show it on camera, but a continuity test is certainly a good idea at this point in time, just to make sure that wiring is actually making a connection. The rest of the wiring is very straightforward. The circuit diagram gives you 2 locations for power and ground, and you can solder these wires on either side of the board, since they are what the original through-hole components used to be. Lastly, the backlight wire solders to pin 2 of this IC. Lastly, we can jig everything into place for a test, but don't forget to plug in this ribbon cable, which controls all the buttons. You can also plug in the speaker as well if you wish. But hey, it works. Awesome. It does look a little bit overexposed here, but that's just because of the camera. In person, this screen looks awesome, miles ahead of the original screen. Alright, let's focus our attention back to this VGA cable. In practice, my plan was starting to become a pain. The tiny wires were annoying to strip and solder to, and worse yet, there's not really a solid ground, it's all in this shielding. I read online that you can solder to shielding, but it's covering such a large area that I just couldn't heat it up enough to get the solder to stick to it. So it's sort of super bodge. In fact, it's really bodge. But I ended up using an old leg from a capacitor or a resistor or something and sort of just wrapped it around. But it is wrapped on there quite tightly and there is continuity, so I guess we'll just roll with it. And yeah, this is pretty dodgy, not gonna lie. I did give it a few test tugs and it does seem to be holding, but if I'm using this one day and the screen cuts out, we'll certainly know why. I'm thinking I probably will properly install that VGA socket in the future, but for now, this does work. So I think I'm just going to roll with it. We'll see how it goes. So I didn't realize it at the time, but on screen now is actually the scan lines mode, which is, fake scan lines to mimic the effect of an old CRT monitor. It was sort of unknown to me at the time, but usually you'd use the backlight button to switch between these modes, and this wasn't working, but we'll get back to this. Now that everything is wired in and confirmed working, at least for now, let's get down to the final assembly. After a courtesy wipe for the clear plastic, which didn't turn out nearly as well as I'd hoped, we can finally go for the money shot. So like I said before, using those screws we can properly mount it, and considering all the wiring, everything actually reassembles quite well. That is, of course, except for the backlight button problem. Like I said before, this is used to switch between several different modes. The modes are just the internal screen, then the internal screen with scan lines. This is then followed by the video out mode, as well as another mode which is the video out with scan lines. With that backlight button not working, not only couldn't I choose scan lines, but I couldn't even go to the video out mode. You may remember in the previous video, I had to snip the end of this ribbon cable because the contacts at the end had rubbed away. Well, after about an hour of troubleshooting and checking all my wiring, I had to do this again. Just simply removing them and reinserting it for this project had worn away the edges again. While all the buttons except the backlight button did work, I noted that the LED was also shining very dimly. So I gave it another snip. Let's hope I never have to open this thing up again, because frankly, there's not much more ribbon cable I can cut away. But with that fixed, everything is now working as well as it should. Note how powerful that LED light is. And I haven't really focused on it yet in this video, but the VGA is quite good as well. Obviously, the imperfections of such a low resolution do show on a big screen, but overall I think it does look quite well, all things considered. And like I mentioned before, this now means I can capture the footage and use them for game reviews. To get my capturing hardware to play nice with VGA, I do have to use a VGA to HDMI upscaler. Personally, I think a little bit of quality is lost. I can't really show it to you in this video because I don't have a way of recording VGA natively, but just from my observations, the colours are a little bit more vibrant when it's just pure VGA. There's definitely a little bit lost in the conversion to HDMI. Oh well, beggars can't be choosers. Before this mod, I didn't have any way to capture Atari Lynx footage. That is the very end of this video. If you've watched both videos, thank you very much for watching the full transformation of this Atari Lynx. I certainly do feel that it has a new lease on life now. Otherwise, please don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this and much more, and I'll see you next time.